Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I am joined by my co-host and good friend Brad. What's going on today, buddy?
Hey, man, I've got a Christmas party with my wife's family today. It's a themed Christmas party, Cowboy Christmas. So, oh man, it's gonna be fun. We're gonna have all kinds of weird thematic stuff.
How many Yellowstone characters are going to show up?
Probably 3, I would bet. But it'll be good. Every time we go to my wife's family functions, there's way too much food. You know, some of the things we talked about last week and what not to do with the holidays will manifest themselves and probably drive me up the wall a little bit. But good. What about you, man?
Not much going on here. We're closing in on the end of the year and getting ready to go up to Massachusetts, visit my folks for the holiday. Just kind of trying to ride it out and relax a little bit. It's a little bit of a downtime here, so
nice.
We'll see. Today's episode is going to be our December AMA. So we have gone out and asked listeners for some questions, and we've got at least 4 here that are pretty good. We'll try to get through those, and if we've got some more time, we'll hit up a few others. But I want to get going here. I'm going to switch things up a little bit, and I'm going to ask the questions this time and let you answer first.
Oh, man.
We'll All right.
Curveball. Ready for it.
So Justin Acuff asks, what's the biggest challenge men like us, meaning those of us in the masculine self-improvement space, face in today's world?
Man, there's a lot of challenges, but I think the biggest challenge is a society that downplays the role of men. It's interesting. If you're a guy and you're on the track, you'll notice there are just so many things that suggest that men are incompetent, men are dumb, men are assholes. It's around us everywhere, in the media, in the news. I have a friend who was recently watching the Willow series reboot on Disney Plus in this lens and gave me this play-by-play that was really interesting of all the women are strong and competent and the men are bumbling idiots who do stupid things and make themselves fools and make themselves look bad. You know, like you actually think of almost any TV show released recently, this mainstream, any sitcoms. Men are idiots. Men are stupid. Men are drunk losers. The women are the ones who run the show. We live in a society where we're discouraged from being men. From what we are encouraged to do, it's to take away our masculinity. Oh, you shouldn't go to the gym. Oh, you shouldn't take care of your family. Oh, you should drink. Why don't you drink? Everything that we have around us tells us not to be men, essentially to abscond our role and to step away from being a masculine man. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I was kind of going along the same mindset when I read the question. Ryan Michler in his book Sovereignty talks about how men are equivalent to the the fire axe behind the glass, where it says break in case of fire. Yeah. Nobody wants to see us. Nobody wants to hear from us. But God forbid something bad happens, they want us around to take care of that issue. And I think that's a real big problem. Masculinity and the men who portray that image are not openly welcomed in society right now. And it's tough to stand up and be that guy, but the world needs it at the end of the day. The world needs masculine men. The world needs strong men to be there to take care of it when shit goes sideways. And it's really tough to portray that image all the time when you're getting beat down by, like you mentioned, TV and social media that's telling the world otherwise.
Yeah. I was telling a few friends the other day that I noticed something. So my daughter had a Christmas performance in school. Her class sung a bunch of songs, and it was cute and it was adorable. And when I went, all the parents of all the second graders were there. And I looked around and I took note of the men there. How few men were physically capable. How few men exuded masculine qualities. And I reached out to my friends. I was like, guys, we are the 1%. Look around you. There are men who are slovenly, gross, lazy, non-masculine men, because that's what the world has conditioned them to be. And you can see it in their demeanor. You can see it in their faces. Their shoulders slump. They don't have good posture. You can tell that they are not content with who they are, but they're exactly what the world has conditioned them to be. And it's sad. And it made me think that, yes, the path to be a sovereign badass of a man can seem daunting and it can seem hard. But our path to greatness and our path to be unstoppable is hardly impeded because there's so few quality, capable men. So it's up to us to find ways to bring them along with us for the ride. And if guys don't want to, that's fine. It's just all the more that's there for us for the taking.
This is we're going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but we were talking before we started recording about confidence and physical appearance and that kind of thing. And which is a good story. Maybe we can tell it at the end. I do the same thing that you do. Is when we go to events at the kids' school or just in the community in general, I'll look around and, I've always got this thought in my back of my mind where, if something goes sideways here, like who are the guys that are going to help and who are the guys that are going to just cower in the corner? And not that I'm any kind of tactical genius or anything like that, but it's like you can kind of tell from just the way a guy carries himself how he's going to respond if a situation occurs. And you kind of like can see that in the guys, and you respect it. And it's really disheartening to see the fact that you are in a small minority. You are there are maybe out of the 20 guys in the room, 3 or 4 who would have your back if something happened and you had to act. I think that's part of, going back to Justin's question though, that's part of the problem, and part of what we face right now is that we're trying to do this and we are still a small minority within the male population of the world, or the male population of this country anyways, where we don't have that brotherhood to kind of rely on. And we have to rely on groups like the Iron Council or Order of Man to find like-minded men and find a path forward.
I think you nailed it. Good question, Justin.
Yeah. So second question comes from our good buddy, Andy Musser. He writes, I have found most friends of mine shy away and don't respond when I talk about doing some self-help or self-care practices. What is it about the average guy that makes him shrink away from these conversations? It's like a conspiracy theory that most men won't even engage in the idea of self-improvement.
When I first read this question, I chuckled to myself because I realized I'm in the same boat. Honestly, the answer is a lot easier than we think it is if you strip away all the layers. If you were to ask a guy, give a guy truth serum, if you will, a lot of guys are going to say that they're discontented with where they are. The guys that shy away are the guys that are shameful or have regret for their current station in life, but just don't want to admit it yet. It's always like, I look back at when I was out of shape and I had friends that were in shape, but they wanted to talk about going to the gym and lifting. What did I want to do in that moment? I sure as hell wanted to be quiet because I knew I wasn't hitting the gym myself. That to me is what the answer really is. They shy away because there could be some other factors, but the primary factor, in my humble estimation, is that they're ashamed or they're embarrassed. If you're talking about all the things that you're doing, and I mean, you and I both know Andy really well, Andy's accomplished some amazing things and overcome some amazing things in his life, like some really difficult things. Like, he's a badass. And the guys around him can obviously see that as palpable. So I'm sure that there's a level of intimidation, shame, or fear in them looking at him and what he's accomplished and thinking, yeah, I ain't that. I don't want to talk about it because I know I ain't that. And I don't want to start to begin to change.
Mm-hmm. The term false masculinity comes to mind when I read this question. And what I mean by that is guys hear the words self-help, self-care, self-improvement, and they go, I don't need that. I'm tough. It's these guys who have this false sense of what masculinity means. Masculinity doesn't necessarily mean being the toughest guy in the room. Masculinity means embracing your manhood, embracing your embracing your manhood. And that may mean trying to improve on yourself to be a better man. There's nothing unmasculine about self-care, self-improvement. I mean, heck, you and I wouldn't have met if we weren't somehow involved in a self-improvement method. We joined the Iron Council to improve ourselves. We found flaws in ourselves and we went, I need help in terms of making myself a better man. There's nothing, emasculating about working on yourself, taking care of yourself, improving yourself, despite the fact that I do think in today's society, it has this negative connotation where men view it as, well, if I have to work on myself, then I'm not a real man to begin with. It's just bullshit.
Yeah. It's like the whole red pill, blue pill, alpha, beta mentality of, oh, I'm a tough guy. I don't need this shit. Guys do. Men do. We are born with the immutable characteristic of being a man, of being a male. And with that, there are certain traits, characteristics that men have. I mean, yes, there's strength, but also most men have the ability to, they should. Men are born with this innate desire to want to provide for their families, to propagate and, procreate. Like, these are things that men are born to do. And what deters them and takes them off that path is what society tells them, what other people tell them, those voices inside of their head. And it's really easy for a man who either thinks he's the shit or is filled with shame to ignore all those things, to turn off that faucet willingly because they're scared of what they might hear if they allow it to be turned on. I don't know if turning on and hearing is a good analogy, but I'm going to go.
So how do you see Justin's original question rolling into this? Because I think that they're tied together a lot. The fact that we face challenges in the self-improvement world, but it's also considered almost taboo within a quote unquote masculine society to work on yourself.
Yeah.
So how do you balance the fact of being a masculine man with still working on yourself?
I would actually even go a little bit further, that it, like, the tabooness of working on yourself extends past the masculine alpha space and goes into the the beta space, if you will, as well. Like the video game playing, Taco Bell eating, pot smoking bro who's got everything all figured out. That's what everything in society, whatever input you're ingesting, a lot of it comes from media, a lot of it comes from popular media, podcasts, books, TV shows. They tell you you're okay just as you are. And when you hear that messaging, you start to believe that shit. You start to believe that you're okay being mediocre. So that when somebody's out there and they're achieving, it's really easy to attach labels to them and to try to drag them. Like, you see this a lot on places like Twitter, where there are high achieving men who are on Twitter and they just get trolled and ransacked by nobodies. But the one thing I'll tell you is the men who are on the path don't give a shit about what others think. The quote says, "A lion doesn't concern himself with the opinion of sheep." A guy who's on the path isn't necessarily going to care what those who are not on the path think of him. But the fact of the matter is, everything in society is creating sheep in one way or another.
This whole concept reminds me of, have you ever heard of the science experiment where they take a group of monkeys and they put the bananas at the top of the ladder, and then when the monkeys start to climb up, they spray them with the hose?
Yeah.
So what happens is, just to kind of fill everyone in, is that they'll put a group of monkeys into a room. They'll put bananas at the top of the ladder, and as the monkeys try to climb up the ladder, they'll spray them with a fire hose, and then they'll take one monkey out and put a new monkey in, and the monkeys have become accustomed to and learned to not climb the ladder because they get sprayed with the hose. Well, over a long period of time, as they start trading out monkeys, they get to the point where there's no monkeys that got sprayed with the hose, but none of them go after the bananas because all the other monkeys kept pulling them down to begin with. And that's what's happening. What you're talking about is this level of mediocrity in society is constantly grabbing at the guys who are trying to climb the ladder and become better men. And it's just pulling them down, pulling them down, pulling them down. And we're getting to a point where we don't even understand why we don't want to be strong masculine men. We just think or know, or quote unquote know, that it's bad. And it boggles my mind. It's like, what could possibly be bad about being somebody who is strong, can protect their family, can provide for their family, has good morals, good virtues? That I've yet to see a reason why that is bad, other than it's hard to do and it implies, a value of strength that somehow or another has become bad in today's society.
It's the perversion of masculinity by fixing that toxic label in front of it, so that there's so many guys out there who believe that masculine characteristics are inherently toxic. It's crazy.
Yeah, but again, it goes back to that axe behind glass, where it's all bad and nasty until somebody actually needs something to take care of, and then you want strong guys to show up.
Cool, I like it.
All right. That was a good one, Andy. Thank you. All right. Next up, Scott English. We're going to change things up here. How do you teach money management or no, how do you teach management, money, time, resources, etc., skills to a significant other without ending up in the doghouse?
So I have to lead this off. When this question was asked, somebody commented and said, make a hotel reservation.
Yeah.
And it made me laugh really hard because that was the first thing I thought. Because this is a slippery slope of a question. The biggest thing that I have learned in my marriage is that my wife is a fiercely independent, capable woman. And there were times in my life where I found that to be almost intimidating because she has her stuff put together. She also isn't necessarily one to come soliciting advice from me. So when it comes to something like this, teaching management of some sort of skill, I wouldn't go as far as to say she needs to ask for it, but you sure as hell need to make sure that she is receptive to. And the way that begins is through asking questions. You have to understand, you have to ask very interesting questions. There's this concept that I introduced to you somewhat recently, Dan. There's this TED Talk. I feel like we mentioned it on a previous episode about the advice monster and taming it. How we as men are prone to giving advice at any turn. Oh, you should do this. Oh, you need to do this. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to do. When the absolute majority of the time, whoever is going through a problem isn't necessarily soliciting advice, and they probably don't want to hear your advice. So what the conversation became was, how can you ask questions that help guide them to their own conclusions? So in the event, let's just say, for example, your wife is struggling with money. That's an easy one, right? Because a lot of people have money struggles. The questions, or the issue then becomes, how can I ask questions to guide her to whatever sort of resolution she's looking for, where I can then insert an opportunity to provide advice or guidance or offer my help or support. I don't know. What do you think about this one?
I was very much on the same kind of page with you, right? So when I saw this question, my first thought was, well, why do you have to teach management to the person, right? Are they, is your wife asking for you to teach them, or are you seeing a deficiency and you want to, like you mentioned, fix it? If it's the latter, I would highly recommend you just steer clear. If it's the former, you got to ask a lot of questions. You got to really dig into, okay, why do you feel you need to fix this? Why are you coming to me? How serious are you about actually fixing this? And then kind of move forward from there. The other thing I'll say is this, you talked about how your wife was a fiercely independent woman. My wife is too. And after 16 years of marriage, 18 years of marriage.
Better get that right, man.
Yeah. Let's edit that out. After 18 years of marriage, I've figured out one thing, and it's that we play to our strengths, right? We are a team. I have certain skill sets. She has certain skill sets. And it doesn't make sense to tread on each other's strong suits. We're a team. So if I'm good at time management, let's say, or planning, and she's good at handling the money, then play to our strengths and let each thing take care of itself. That doesn't mean that she's not involved in the planning and that I'm not aware of what's going on with our finances. It's just that we let the person who's got that skill set be the dominant person in that part of our overall relationship. That being said, if your spouse comes to you and says, hey, listen, you're really good at time management. Can you teach me how you take care of that? I have this situation at work, and I think some of the skills that you have are transferable here. Trickle the information. I've made the mistake of just going full bore. I mean, Brad, how sometimes OCD I can be in terms of getting organized.
What? Never.
And I've thrown a lot of stuff at my wife at one point, and she's just like, you know what? That's too much. I don't need nearly that much. And she just completely tunes me out. Whereas if I had just really spent the time to more sit down and understand what she needs and what the situation is at work versus just regurgitating every time management skill that I know or planning skill that I know, it would have helped her a lot more. And it probably would have made our relationship a little bit stronger. So what I'm getting at is you really got to dig into the why and then the what. Why are they asking for this skill set and what do they really need? And if the why is they're not asking, but I just feel like fixing something, don't.
Yeah, there has to be some level of receptiveness there. even if, like, especially, I look at this question from Scott, and I don't necessarily see it as somebody coming, like your wife coming to you asking you how to do something. It's
Yeah.
something that you've observed that she needs to improve upon. And that's the area of, going back to what Dan said, do not proactively solicit your coaching, your teaching. Understand the situation. Ask good questions. Kind of to sum this up, one kind of a situation in the reverse for me is, we've talked about some of my financial struggles that I dealt with when I was single. We got married. I continued to struggle with money. I lied to my wife and hid things financially from her. So the decision was made, with my agreement, after a lot of talking, that I would cede control of our family finances to her because she's really organized and structured. I did not like it, but I think my wife did it in a very mature way of saying, you're not great with money. I need to be able to do this. We talked about it. Here is the why. It's kind of funny, but she gives me an allowance, so to speak, every month to play with for things that I like to do. And she'll take care of things. And it was one of those situations where the conversation was difficult, but she handled it in a way, by asking good questions, by making statements, by making it obvious that these are the things that I needed to do, that we needed to do together, so that we'd be able to move forward. And was it painful for me to hear? Yeah. But the most important thing, and this goes both ways for the person trying to offer skills, assistance, and the person on the other side, is you have to leave your ego at the door, especially in marriage. I'm like, this applies to marriage every minute of every day. Leave your damn ego at the door. As long as you leave your ego aside, those conversations go much better.
I was thinking about that a little bit too with the finances. The one suggestion I would have is, we talked about how if your spouse isn't asking for help, don't just bring it. If you're seeing a situation where their activity is driving you into a big financial hole, I would not bring your ability to do finances better into the picture. But I have been in situations where both of us, because we do both kind of handle the finances in different areas, have approached the other and said, hey, listen, I'm not telling you how to spend money, but we need to take a look at, the balance sheet basically, and see the incomes versus the outflows, and how our collective activity is affecting our financial situation, and approach the situation that way. Because my wife and I have been guilty in the past of being spenders on various things, and we have had to dial it back in. But we've both done it at a mature level where it's like, okay, listen, I'm not saying don't spend money, but we need to identify how our spending right now is affecting our future.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, putting a balance statement or a credit card statement down on a table between the two of you is a pretty great arbiter of truth.
I'll tell you, so my wife and I are both, right, we're both in corporate America. We have jobs where we deal with budget and finance on a pretty regular basis. And what works for us is we actually do a monthly balance sheet. She's actually in finance. So that was a way for me to kind of speak her language a little bit, where I just list all of our incomes, and then, our gross income, and then all of our expenses and our gross expenses, and then our profit or loss at the end of the month. And it's something that we take a look at on a fairly regular basis. And it allows us to view the family finances in almost a business way that makes sense to both of us, because we see it on such a regular basis.
Yeah.
And that's how we do it. We don't necessarily budget per se, but we take a look at, income, outgoing, and how that's affecting us and what trends we're seeing.
Yeah. And I mean, you both are data driven
Yeah.
people, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And that's a really key point. Do what works for you in your situation and your skill sets. Right? Like what Dan does, because Dan's an engineer and his wife's in finance, they're very data driven. That might not work for you. Find a system that works for you and stick to it. For my wife and I, it's the old battering ram approach of, here's the credit card statement, because we put everything on the same credit card every month. Let's go through it line by line, itemize it, throw it in our budget. Yep. Something's going to work for everybody, but it is what works for everybody.
I listen to these guys, Manager Tools. It's a podcast for obviously for managers. And one of their key sayings is communication is what the listener does. And the idea behind that is understanding how the person you're communicating to hears things and takes information in, and learning to use the term, speak their language. Figure out what's going to be effective in translating the information that you have to them in a manner that they'll receive and they'll use and they'll appreciate, versus just trying to beat them over the head with facts.
Man, it's really well put. You actually introduced me to Manager Tools. It's a great resource for anybody who is in a management role in their career. Highly recommended.
They're really good.
Yeah.
So. All right. Thank you, Scott. So the next one is from Fred. I'm going to butcher your last name, but Fred Bocher here. And he asks, how do you get your daughter to stop being picky about her food? She finds something wrong with everything we give her.
Oh, man. Welcome to fatherhood.
I was going to say, you're more in that younger children era than me. So let's have it out.
I deal with this on the daily. So my son is 4 and he eats like there are 3 things he'll consistently eat, like from a main course perspective. We'll give him chicken. He won't touch it. He'll tell us he wants a quesadilla, but he calls it a cheesy roll up. Give it to him. He won't touch it. He's become very picky, and it's a battle. My wife wants to pull her hair out because she'll make this really nice dinner that everybody loves. He wants nothing to do with it. So this is my life right now. There are some things that I would tell you, Fred, that are important. Number 1, don't ever tell her that she's picky. Using that verbiage, especially with a girl. Girls hinge on virtually every word that their father says. If you tell a girl that she's picky, she's going to start to believe that about herself, and that's going to extrapolate in other areas and spread like a virus. So, thing number 1, yeah, she might be picky. Don't call attention to it. Item number 2, keep giving her everything that you and your wife are eating. All right. She doesn't get a special menu because she doesn't want what's in front of her. The family eats what the family eats. And if she chooses not to eat, that's her decision. Consistency is 100% the key here. Everything that you make, she gets it. It's up to her if she wants to eat. And then I would also highly recommend, and I assume you're already doing this, make sure that you're eating dinner every night at the table as a family. That she's not over eating on the couch watching TV and you're over here doing it while you're doing work. All of you are sitting around the table with the same meal, talking and eating. Right? That consistency and that repetition, it might not get her to stop being picky, but it is going to help her understand that it's not okay to continually state that she's picky and to complain about it, because it's what the family's eating, and it's that or it's nothing.
Yeah. So Brad obviously has children that are younger. I'm not, Fred, I don't know how old your daughter is. I'm assuming that she's younger. I can tell you, I got 2 13-year-old daughters now who eat just about everything. And yep. I'm not going to tell you that this is the right way, but I'll tell you what we did. And those are the results that we had. So we did a lot of what Brad said. There was no special meals, despite my wife's concerns at certain points during their growing up. My wife would want to get up and make, just a bunch of chicken nuggets or something so that they would eat. But we didn't do that. It was, this is what the family's eating. Obviously, if my wife and I had something like very spicy or something, she'd make a portion of it that was not as spicy for when they were younger and that kind of stuff. But this is what we're eating. We had the rule of, and you take this for whatever it's worth, this is what worked for us. We had the rule of, you get a little bit of everything that's being served and you have to try a bite. You don't have to eat it all. You have to try a bite. That actually expanded their palates a lot, because it was something that my kids actually got pretty smart to it pretty quick. They realized that if I just take the bite of the stuff that I quote unquote know I don't like, by the way, they ended up liking a lot of it first, then I can eat, the rice and the chicken or whatever's left. But that opened up their palate a little bit. And again, we didn't make a big deal about them being picky. We just say, hey, listen, this is what's for dinner. If you don't want this, that's fine. But, there's nothing else for dinner. Now, as they got a little bit older, it was like, all right, if you don't want this, you can make yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Have fun. But we're not making it for you. And it just kind of went that way. At this point, I mean, I've got one daughter she's constantly asking for sushi every night because she just they'll eat anything.
Girl.
I've got one of my daughters, I got a video of her being, oh gosh, she was probably like 6 or 7, and she's trying Indian food, chicken tikka masala. She's like, it tastes like tomato sauce. it's just funny. But we gave it to the kids, and we're just like, this is what's your dinner. Just you got to give them little bits and pieces. We did try to cater the meal so that there was at least something that we knew was within their acceptable range. So like if we were making, I can't think of a meal right now, but there would always be like a grilled chicken or some rice or, just some straight vegetables or something like that, where we knew that they would at least have, something that they could eat. And, every once in a while rewards work too. Hey, if you eat your dinner, you get dessert. That it's not the best approach. And I'm not a big fan of applying kids with dessert, but every once in a while it worked to get them to eat a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's something that my wife does with my son, is you have to have a bite of this before you can leave the table. And that's the one thing I didn't mention. So I'm glad you brought that up. We do it as well. What it does mean is sometimes we when we have more adventurous dinners, we'll create kind of a more easy to ingest version for him. Like, speaking of Indian food, we had Indian food the other day. So we got like some chicken from the Indian food and got all the curry off and then cut it up for him. So it's had a little bit of the flavor. Because to Dan's point, it's introducing and learning, and the kids learning to expand their palate, right? Like, I guarantee you, your daughter, when she's 20 years old, is not going to be an exceptionally, unbelievably picky eater. She just is right now. So introducing her, expanding that palate, it'll pay dividends in the long run. She'll be better for it. As painful as it might be right now.
Yeah. And it's funny how that works. So I'll tell you a little story about myself. Is my folks had the complete opposite. They said, this is what's your dinner, and you'll clean your plate, because they always use this Hungry Kids in Africa approach, right?
Oh, yeah.
And to this day, I cannot eat zucchini. My mom would make, just whatever. She'd make zucchini, and I would sit there and I would wait, and I would just, stubborn Italian Dan, sit there. I would sit at the table for an hour and a half. I'd have this cold lump of like mushy zucchini on my plate. I'd be like waiting for the dog to come by, and he'd be coming by looking at it going, I ain't eating that. And it just
zucchini gets gross after a while.
Yeah,
too.
And it gets gross.
Man.
So to this day, like I have this like inherent, and believe me, I've had like grilled zucchini. It's really good, but I just can't wrap my head around it mentally. I was also the kid who was very picky, and my wife will tell you, when we started dating, even in my early 20s, I wouldn't even eat a salad. I wouldn't eat a burrito because it had more than just rice and beef in it. Like I have expanded my palate considerably since then, but it's because I was forced to eat food like that when I was a kid. So there's a balancing game between you have to try it and you have to eat it. Yeah. That the parents have to find, so that you are introducing new foods, but you're not making trying new foods like a bad thing.
Like the one bite approach is a good thing. Forcing them to eat and clean their plate is a bad thing. Because I was a lot like you in that, my parents made us disgusting spaghetti with like, I hated it at the time, but they always got the mushroom Prego spaghetti sauce with like tons of mushrooms in it. And I hated mushrooms as a kid.
Oh, any spaghetti sauce that comes in a jar is wrong.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. I would hide these mushrooms in my cheeks, and I'd like rub them out on the side of the couch. Like just slovenly behavior. And honestly, it kind of created an unhealthy relationship with food for me when I was forced to clean my plate. Coming back to what Dan said, right? Introduce, let them try it, settle for, try a bite and you can leave the table. Don't force them to clean their plate. Yeah. If they leave half a plate of food, that's their problem, and they'll figure that out in time.
And listen, they're going to be hungry enough that they're going to want to eat something. And if
they'll
that's
come crawling back and eat something later. Yeah.
We've got friends who also use the whole, well, you didn't finish your dinner, so that's what's for breakfast approach. I can't imagine that worked out well for them.
Yeah, really?
Can you imagine making your kids eat like a
cold spaghetti, reheated spaghetti?
Yeah, chicken marsala for breakfast.
Reheated marsala? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's terrible.
All right. Well, we appreciate everyone sending their questions. Do you want to tell your story?
Sure, I'll tell a story. So I've not shied from the fact that I do DoorDash / Uber at night on Fridays and Saturday nights to supplement our household income. And last night I was doing an Uber trip, and as you guys know, I live here in Utah, and it was up in Park City. So Park City is a good 35 miles away from, about 30 miles away from Salt Lake. And I get a request, and I look at it, and it's like, this looks weird. It looks like I'm starting here and ending here, but it looks like there's something in Salt Lake. So I picked people up. They'd just flown in from out of state, staying up at some resort in Park City. They'd forgotten their suitcase at the airport. For one, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you leave the airport without your suitcase, but whatever. So I get in, and it's rush hour, so it's kind of a long trip. The way down the canyon, Harley's Canyon, which connects Salt Lake and Park City. And the guy is just pissed the entire time. He's cursing up a storm. He's being belligerent and rude to his girlfriend. He's being belligerent and rude to me. Just being a total dick the entire way down. Like, she's trying to calm him down, asking where he wants to go to dinner. And he's like, F that, I don't want dinner. This is stupid. I'm so mad. And then I tried to make a comment about traffic, and he bristled at me. And I was just like, all right, whatever, bro. So we get down to the airport. They go in. They find their bag. And when they come back out, like, I pop the trunk. I was like, all right, I'll help him load the bag into my trunk. Be a nice guy, whatever. I get out, and I realized, because I didn't really look at him when he climbed my car. He's little. He might be like 5'5", 130 pounds. He just looks at me, looks up, and like gets this look on his face. Because I'm 6'1", 220. Like, I'm not small. Obviously work out. Like, I don't look small. He just kind of jaw was gaping a little bit. He was so nice to me the whole way back. It was a funny little time.
Well, I wanted you to tell that story too, because it kind of goes to our conversation last week with Johnny about, the capable man, and how, listen, you've got some God gifted size in terms of being your height and your overall size, but just being in shape, being physically fit, being the capable man, as he put it. It demands respect, and it builds confidence, right? Because you're just sitting there kind of taking the BS from the guy in the backseat, and it's like, whatever. And then when the situation presented itself, it was like, okay, here we go.
Yeah. It's comical. It's one of those things you realize when you're a bigger guy who's in at least somewhat decent shape, that there's a little bit of intimidation that some guys see in you. And it comes back to kind of what Justin had posed, right? Like, there's so many guys who aren't that, who eat way too much Taco Bell, or are really scrawny and they're okay with it, and they embrace being effeminate. When you're that man, it's recognized. Like, you have an aura about you, and it really sticks out in certain situations.
Yeah, I think it's more about how you carry yourself, though, too, right?
Yeah.
You talked about, being really scrawny and effeminate. Like, you can still be masculine and not be, a power lifter or a bodybuilder or something like that.
You knew what I meant.
I know what you meant, but I want to make sure it's very clear. It's being physically fit and being in shape. You carry yourself differently. Even if you weren't as tall as you are, or as big as you are, being in the shape that you're in and just standing up with your shoulders back. And the height
shoulders
difference.
Back, head up.
Right. The height difference definitely helped. But having that physical presence provides a lot of confidence, and also, frankly, prevents a lot of situations from happening that might have happened. Guys aren't going to screw with guys who look like they're confident and who look like they have some physical capability.
Yeah. And this has nothing to do with size. What Dan's saying, like we've talked about, I train jujitsu. The jujitsu gym I go to has something like 20 black belts. Probably one of the best black belts of the school, 3rd-degree black belt. He's a little guy. He might be 5'6", weighs like 150. But you know it. You look at him and you're like, I'm not going to mess with that, because it's how he carries himself.
I don't know if you saw,
head up.
I don't know if you saw this week on Instagram, but Thor, the big Thor, the world's strongest man guy.
Yeah.
He was training jiu-jitsu with somebody, and I'm not in the game, so I don't know who it was, but the guy was getting ready for a fight. He was training with Thor, and I don't know if he was a really little guy or if he just looked that little because Thor's so big. But anyways, he was much smaller than him. He completely owned him. completely own Thor. I mean, you see this big, massive mountain of a man just getting owned by this little guy who just knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
But after they were rolling around, they got up, they stood up, and you could just see that guy walked around with a certain air, a certain confidence, shoulders back, just upright, confident, had a certain look. And it's like, that's the guy I'm looking for. That's the look I'm looking for. I'm not necessarily looking for how big you are, how small you are. There's a look in your eye. There's a way you carry your body that makes all the difference in the world. So
yeah, I just looked it up. It was Gordon Ryan. Ryan's not small. He's like 6'2", 220.
Yeah, but he looks tiny
but
comparatively.
He looks tiny next to Thor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
All right. Well, I appreciate you telling that story, man.
Yeah, of course.
So I want to thank all the guys for listening to this episode. These are always fun. So, if you've got questions, send them in. We will definitely be using them in future AMA episodes. Brad and I like to do these every month, and they're a lot of fun because they just let us kind of, shoot the bull here. First things I want to do is wish everyone who's listening a very Merry Christmas. This will drop right before the Christmas holiday. So hope you guys get to enjoy the time with your friends and family. Make sure you're checking us out at untamingmasculinity.com. You'll find show notes for this and all of our other episodes there, as well as links to our social media. Please come check us out on Instagram specifically. We're growing a base there, and we've had a lot of fun conversations going on there. So check us out. If you found value to this podcast, we would really appreciate if you leave us a rating and review in your podcast player. That helps us get seen and spread the word to other men. And then finally, make sure you come back next week. As we mentioned last week, we've got a bunch of interviews lined up. This actually would have been an interview episode, but our good friend lost power the night we were supposed to be interviewing him. So we'll catch up with him next week or in the next couple of weeks. And just make sure you keep coming back because we're going to be doing some great episodes here. So until then, enjoy your holidays, and we'll leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?